There comes a moment when an INFJ stops trying to rationalize their intuition and simply follows it. And that moment is dangerous for anyone who operates in shadows. Because INFJ intuition does not arrive gently or gradually. It hits like a spotlight, illuminating motives people worked hard to hide. Without asking a single question, without confronting, without explaining, the INFJ suddenly knows. And this unexplained clarity terrifies manipulators who depended on confusion, guilt, and emotional fog to stay in control. An INFJ's intuition becomes a mirror that exposes the truth people hoped would never surface.
The real threat isn't that INFJs uncover lies, it's that they understand the emotional architecture behind them. They see the intent behind the smile, the insecurity behind the anger, the calculation behind the kindness. Manipulators feel this shift instantly, even if nothing is said. They sense the INFJ withdrawing their energy, reclaiming their empathy, and observing with a level of psychological precision that can't be deceived. It's the kind of clarity that dismantles manipulation without confrontation, making the manipulator unravel under the weight of their own tactics. If you've ever felt your intuition sharpened so intensely that the truth became impossible to ignore, I want to hear from you. Have you ever sensed someone's hidden motives long before they revealed themselves? Leave your answer in the comments with the word clarity, so I know you're part of the INFJ minds who see deeper than most. And if you want more insights that decode your intuition, identity, and silent power, make sure you subscribe. Your mind deserves content that speaks your language.
INFJ intuition detects manipulation before any logical evidence appears. It's the kind of perception that feels almost supernatural to others, but to an INFJ, it's simply the quiet machinery of their inner world turning with precision. They don't wait for proof, patterns, or confessions. The moment someone's emotional tone shifts by even a fraction, their intuition lights up like a warning flare. Before anyone else notices the tension behind a smile, the slight delay in an answer, or the subtle hunger in someone's eyes, the INFJ has already mapped the underlying intention. Their mind runs a silent diagnostic in real time, comparing micro-expressions, emotional vibrations, and unspoken motives with a lifetime of observed human behavior. This isn't paranoia, it's pattern recognition sharpened through years of watching people reveal themselves accidentally. And while everyone else is still charmed, convinced, or distracted, the INFJ has already stepped mentally outside the interaction to study its architecture from a distance. This early detection isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It starts as a quiet shift in the INFJ's presence. They lean back internally, detach a little, and start gathering more information while saying almost nothing. Their eyes soften, but their perception sharpens. They begin noticing what the person avoids saying, where their emotional weight lands, how their energy pulls or pushes. The INFJ doesn't accuse or confront. They simply observe until the truth becomes unmistakable. Manipulators hate this phase without knowing why. They feel exposed, unsettled, unable to get emotional traction. The more they try to steer the interaction, the clearer their intentions become to the INFJ, whose internal map is already filling in the missing pieces long before the first real red flag appears. By the time logical evidence shows up, the contradiction, the guilt-tinged apology, the manipulating slip, the INFJ is already 10 steps ahead, emotionally gone, mentally prepared, and spiritually armored. Their intuition doesn't just predict manipulation, it dismantles its power long before anyone else sees the threat. Their unexplained clarity exposes emotional inconsistencies manipulators try to hide. To an INFJ, people don't reveal themselves through words. They reveal themselves through the emotional fingerprints left behind every sentence. A manipulator crafts their stories carefully, rehearses their tone, adjusts their expressions, but the INFJ's clarity slices straight through the performance. They catch the micro-shift between the emotion someone pretends to feel and the emotion vibrating underneath.
They notice when the sadness sounds rehearsed, when the enthusiasm feels hollow, when the apology lacks weight. This clarity isn't something they can explain logically. It emerges in an instant, like a flash of internal lightning that illuminates everything the other person hoped to keep in the dark. While everyone else listens to the narrative, the INFJ listens to the emotional static between the lines, and that is where the truth always leaks. Manipulators hate this kind of clarity because it makes them feel seen in a way they cannot control. When they try to play the victim, the INFJ senses the entitlement beneath the helplessness. When they switch to flattery, the INFJ feels the hunger behind the praise. When they pretend to be calm, the INFJ detects the irritation humming under their skin. Every mask slips just a little, but the INFJ sees enough to recognize the entire pattern. They don't call it out loudly. They don't need to. Their energy changes, a subtle withdrawal, a tightening of inner boundaries, a sudden emotional neutrality that leaves the manipulator confused and unsettled. They feel that something just shifted in the room, but they can't pinpoint what the INFJ saw.
And that's what makes the INFJ's clarity dangerous. It reveals deception without confrontation. The manipulator finds themselves losing influence, losing emotional grip, losing the ability to bend the situation their way. The INFJ doesn't warn, argue, or defend, they simply know. And that knowledge becomes the silent force that dismantles the manipulator's control long before anyone else realizes a game was even being played.
They read intentions, not words, making deceptive behavior instantly visible. An INFJ doesn't listen to what someone says. They listen to why they said it. Before a sentence is even finished, they've already mapped out the emotional motive behind it, the hunger for validation, the attempt to manipulate sympathy, the strategic flattery, the concealed frustration. Words are fog, but intentions are flame, and an INFJ sees the fire behind the smoke long before anyone else smells the burn. This ability isn't dramatic or mystical. It's simply the result of a lifetime spent watching how people act when they think no one is really paying attention. To the INFJ, a deceptive person stands out like a bright stain on an otherwise clean surface, impossible to ignore no matter how carefully they try to blend in. And when someone speaks with hidden motives, the INFJ feels the emotional distortion immediately. The tone doesn't match the expression. The timing feels too deliberate. The energy of the conversation dips or spikes unnaturally. It's not the lie itself they detect, it's the intention behind the lie. A person may offer kindness with a selfish motive attached. The INFJ senses the transaction instead of the warmth. Someone may express concern laced with jealousy. The INFJ hears the envy before the compassion. Even silence carries intention, and INFJs can decode the meaning inside it: avoidance, fear, manipulation, or preparation for a calculated move. Their mind automatically fills in the emotional gaps others pretend not to leave.
This is why deceptive people grow uneasy around INFJs without knowing why. Their tricks fall flat. Their stories feel exposed. Their strategies lose power the moment the INFJ steps into the room with quiet perception that cannot be fooled or redirected. The INFJ doesn't confront them. Confrontation is unnecessary. The truth is already visible in the INFJ's eyes, not the facts of what was said, but the blueprint of the person saying it. And once an INFJ sees your intentions, they never unsee them, and you lose the ability to shape the narrative ever again. INFJs sense energetic shifts that reveal when someone's motives change.
An INFJ doesn't wait for actions, words, or explanations. The moment a person's internal state shifts, they feel it like a subtle temperature drop in the room. A tone that used to feel warm suddenly carries a thin edge. The person's presence, once open, now feels guarded. The rhythm of interaction changes: delayed responses, forced enthusiasm, a smile that doesn't match the eyes. None of it is dramatic enough for most people to notice, but to an INFJ, these micro-shifts blaze like warning lights. It's not paranoia, it's pattern recognition. Motives leak through energy long before they reveal themselves in behavior, and INFJs are wired to notice the disturbance immediately. They can sense when someone who once cared becomes indifferent, when curiosity turns into calculation, or when admiration quietly transforms into envy. Even the slightest emotional disturbance in another person feels like a ripple across the surface of the INFJ's inner lake, impossible to ignore. They detect when someone begins expecting something from them, when a person's intentions darken, when a hidden agenda starts forming beneath polite conversation. Without hearing a word, INFJs understand. Something has shifted, and it's always correct. People often try to mask their motives with charm or consistency, but energy is the one thing that never lies, and INFJs read it with surgical precision. This ability unsettles manipulative people because it robs them of one crucial advantage: timing. A manipulator needs secrecy, subtle progression, the slow buildup of influence, but an INFJ feels the pivot the instant it happens. The relationship might look the same on the surface, but internally the INFJ has already stepped back, observing, measuring, recalibrating their trust. They know when someone is about to pull away, when they are about to betray, when their interest has become transactional. This doesn't give INFJs power in the traditional sense. It gives them clarity, and clarity is more dangerous than confrontation. Once an INFJ feels a shift in motive, the connection will never return to its previous state, because the INFJ now knows exactly what kind of truth is unfolding behind the person's eyes.
Their silence triggers manipulators because it removes emotional leverage.
When an INFJ goes silent, something profound happens beneath the surface. The entire psychological battlefield shifts. Manipulators rely on reaction, on emotional cues, on the subtle pulls and pushes that let them steer another person's response. But the moment an INFJ withdraws into silence, that entire system collapses. There is no outrage to twist, no confusion to exploit, no vulnerability to hook into. Silence becomes a wall, smooth, impenetrable, unreadable, and for someone who feeds on control, that absence of emotional access is terrifying. The manipulator suddenly realizes they have nothing to grab onto because the INFJ has taken back the one thing the manipulator was using as leverage: emotional availability. NFJ's silence is not passive, it's diagnostic. As the INFJ withdraws their emotional signals, the manipulator begins to reveal their true nature. They push harder, they prod, they test boundaries, trying to provoke any response: irritation, fear, guilt, anything they can use to re-establish control. But instead, they're met with stillness, calmness, a kind of quiet that feels like standing in front of a locked vault. Without emotional feedback, their usual tactics fall flat. Gaslighting doesn't work when the INFJ no longer seeks clarity. Guilt-tripping fails when the INFJ no longer feels responsible for the manipulator's feelings. Love-bombing loses its shine when the INFJ sees the pattern behind it. The manipulator becomes exposed, not through confrontation, but through the INFJ's complete refusal to play the game. This silence is not revenge, it is liberation. It signals the moment the INFJ stops internalizing the manipulator's narrative and starts listening to their own intuition. It is the moment emotional leverage dissolves, and with it, the manipulator's power. Suddenly, the INFJ is no longer an emotional participant, but a detached observer. And manipulators cannot operate under observation. They cannot thrive in clarity. They cannot influence someone who is no longer reachable through emotion. In this silence, the INFJ becomes untouchable, not colder, but clearer, and the manipulator finally realizes the truth. The game ended the moment the INFJ stopped responding.
They mirror the manipulator's true self back at them, causing discomfort and panic.
Manipulators can lie to others, to situations, even to themselves, but they cannot lie in front of an INFJ. The INFJ becomes an emotional mirror, reflecting not the words spoken, but the intention behind them. And this reflection is what terrifies manipulators most. When the INFJ listens, they don't just hear language, They absorb emotional patterns, inconsistencies, shifts in tone, microexpressions, and energy. Without trying, they illuminate the gaps between what the manipulator claims and what the manipulator feels. Suddenly, the manipulator sees their own motives laid bare in the INFJ's quiet, steady gaze. It is like being watched by someone who knows not only what you're doing, but why you're doing it, long before you consciously admit it to yourself. This mirroring is not confrontational. The INFJ doesn't accuse or expose. They simply understand, deeply, silently, unnervingly. They respond in ways that subtly reflect the manipulator's emotional state back at them, revealing the contradiction between the image they project and the truth they hide. The manipulator senses this instantly. Their charm feels hollow, their tactics lose rhythm, their usual psychological hooks fail to sink in. In the INFJ's presence, every mask begins to slip. Every carefully curated persona feels fragile. And the manipulator experiences something they rarely face, themselves unedited. This creates a rising discomfort, a panic that stems from realizing the INFJ is not reacting to the performance, but to the person beneath it. The more the manipulator tries to maintain control, the clearer their own motives become, not just to the INFJ, but to themselves. The INFJ becomes a living contradiction to their script. Calm where they expect chaos, perceptive where they anticipate confusion, reflective where they rely on distraction. In this mirrored clarity, the manipulator loses their psychological footing. They can no longer hide behind manipulation because the INFJ sees them too clearly, understands them too deeply, and reflects back the truths they have spent years avoiding. Faced with their unmasked self, the manipulator spirals, not because the INFJ attacks them, but because the INFJ makes attack impossible.
INFJ. Intuition dismantles manipulation effortlessly, revealing truth without confrontation.
To the INFJ, manipulation is not a puzzle to solve. It unravels on its own the moment it enters their perceptual field. Their intuition does the work quietly, automatically, without needing evidence, arguments, or explanations. A tone that doesn't match the emotion behind it, a smile that strains at the edges, a compliment delivered with calculated timing. The INFJ registers these contradictions instantly. What others overlook as harmless quirks, the INFJ feels as fractures in emotional truth. And once they sense those fractures, manipulation begins to collapse under its own weight. The INFJ doesn't interrogate or accuse, they simply stop feeding the manipulator the emotional responses that keep the tactic alive. Without fuel, the manipulation loses power. Without reaction, the manipulator loses control. What makes INFJ intuition so disarming is that it bypasses logic entirely. It doesn't wait for lies to surface or contradictions to accumulate. It sees the motive before the move, the intention before the action. While manipulators work in linear steps, charm, soften, influence, control, the INFJ reads the entire sequence simultaneously, like seeing the whole story before the book is opened. This gives them a quiet, strategic advantage. They withdraw their emotional availability at the exact moment manipulation attempts to tighten its grip. Their silence isn't passive, it is precision. Without confrontation, without raised voices, without even breaking the social atmosphere, the INFJ shifts the dynamic completely. The manipulator senses the change but cannot trace where they lost control.
And then comes the moment that terrifies manipulators most, when the INFJ looks at them with calm, knowing eyes. No anger, no fear, just clarity. In that instant, the manipulator realizes their tactics are transparent, not because the INFJ exposed them, but because the INFJ refused to play. The truth stands stark in the space between them, undeniable and unspoken. The manipulator is left alone with their own intentions, stripped of the illusion of power. The INFJ, without a single confrontation or outward act, has dismantled the entire structure. Their intuition doesn't win through conflict, it wins through understanding.
There comes a moment when an INFJ stops trying to explain what they feel and simply lets their intuition speak for them. Not through words, not through confrontation, but through a clarity that unsettles anyone who hoped to hide behind charm, performance, or emotional games. That moment is where the entire dynamic shifts, because the INFJ finally stands in the full power of seeing things as they are, not as people pretend them to be. And once truth has been seen, nothing can return to how it was before. If you've ever felt this shift inside yourself, the quiet recognition that you're done justifying what your intuition already knows, then you understand the transformation that follows. It isn't anger. It isn't revenge. It's liberation. It's the internal door closing softly, permanently, on people who believed they could shape your reality. From that point forward, your intuition becomes not a burden, but a shield. Not a sensitivity, but a weapon. And the world around you begins to reveal who was genuine and who was terrified of your clarity all along. Before you go, tell me this. Have you ever trusted your intuition before evidence appeared and later realized it was right? Drop the word clarity in the comments if this resonated with you, and let's see how many of us share the same silent strength.